Good afternoon. We're happy to give you a flood outlook today. I'm Mayor Tim Mahoney, and this is Commissioner Chairman Chad Peterson from the county. I think we've had some wonderful news happen over the last several days. When Easter came, the sun came out, everybody was happy. And what happened with that was some melting. Well, that's great, but guess what's happening? We're going to have a flood again this spring. And with the flood comes my vest and comes sandbags. When Chad and I have looked at this, next slide, please. We have an idea of how many bags we are going to require for this flood fight. Of course, you always look for great optimism about how low it'll be or how high it'll be. And I'll have our engineers go over that and show you exactly what their thoughts are. But in order to build almost 200,000 bags, that's going to take 5 days of sandbagging. And we're doing out at Sandbag Cass, which is the engineering area, or the out in the
Cass County Highway Department.
Cass County Highway Department. And at that location, it's the first time we're doing it out there with this amount, 2 spiders, and we're going to run a lot of school kids through it and a lot of volunteers through it. But anticipating if everybody shows up and helps us out, we should be able to get the sandbags we need Tuesday through Friday. If we're unable to hit the amount we need, what would go over the weekend, Chad?
Yes, sir.
Then we go over the weekend. So we got a great news, definitive forecast you don't usually get until the river is flowing and things are happening. But Nathan, out of some wonderment, got us a forecast now that will help us guide us to how high we think the river's going to get. And you always have everybody who's a flood expert, right? When the weather gets nice, the sun is out, and everything's wonderful, we all kind of become prophets of what's going to happen. The reality is the engineers have to work the deal and come up with the idea of where it's actually going to be. So we'll let Nathan explain. We've got some good news today, but explain where we think we're headed.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so first slide I have here today was the probabilistic forecast the National Weather Service issued back on March 23rd. I thought this is still relevant today to talk through to help illustrate why we're looking at some of the numbers we are today. So to recap a little bit of what's all on this graph, the probabilistic numbers on the left-hand side would be more if we had a normal melt or a warmer than normal melt, as well as below normal precipitation. In the middle would be if we had an average spring, normal precipitation, average melt. On the right-hand side is if we'd have colder than normal temperatures, a delayed melt, and significantly above normal precipitation. Unfortunately, since that probabilistic forecast was issued back on March 23rd, we have continued to experience some more snow, as illustrated on this map here, these two maps. The map on the left-hand side is the amount of water within the snowpack upstream of Fargo within our drainage basin area. The area outlined in black is roughly the contributing drainage area for the Red River upstream of us. As you can see between the two maps, we did see some additional snowfall upstream of us, which has resulted in more water potentially heading our direction later this month. So what does that mean? Last week, the National Weather Service issued a melt update for the Red River Basin. Out of that melt update was this slide here that illustrates that really for the Fargo area on the Red River, we should be concentrating on the right-hand side of that probabilistic forecast that was issued back on the 23rd. If we got little to no additional precipitation prior to the crest within the river, we're really looking at the 50% or those 50% to 25% numbers. And if we had additional precipitation, we're looking at the higher numbers at that time. So what was that deterministic forecast or probabilistic forecast for Fargo back at that point? The 55 or 50% number was roughly a river stage of 34. The 10%, which is what we're still planning for today, was approximately a 38-foot crest. So those two boxes in purple and blue are really the numbers that we are looking as probably our window for what our potential river crests will be on the red this spring. So the last minute news that the mayor alluded to here a little bit ago was the National Weather Service just issued first deterministic forecast for the river here in Fargo. It's important to point out that this does not include a projected river crest. So this forecast is just the next 7-day window. National Weather Service has indicated that the initial rise that they are demonstrating on this graph is projected to flatten out once we get close to that 30-foot river stage and be flat for a little bit while the projected weather temperatures this weekend to get closer to 40 degrees again instead of the 50-degree temperatures we're going to be seeing next couple days. So we're going to see initial rise on the river, flatten out around 30 feet, but still believe that there's another rise after that point, and that the probabilistic forecast that they issued back on March 23rd is still valid, and that we still need to be planning for those river levels as we move forward through the rest of the month. So what does that mean for Fargo? For Fargo, we are going to be relying on our existing infrastructure that we've been able to build the last 14 years, which is almost 30 miles of levees and floodwalls. But for various river levels, we still are required to do emergency measures. So if we had a 37-foot crest, we'd still be required to have about a mile worth of emergency measures. 38-foot crest, which is still what we are planning for today for our planning purposes, is 2 miles of emergency measures. But on a 39-foot crest, we'd need about 6 miles. And that's where our 80,000 sandbag number is required. We're planning for, like I mentioned, a 38-foot crest, but we wanted to make sure that we had our due diligence in place for a 39-foot river crest, knowing that we're getting towards some uncharted territory here for how the river melt may or may not occur, as well as a period where we could get a basin-wide rainfall event that may cause the river to rise a little quicker than we may think, and we wanted to have those sandbags in place to be able to react accordingly. So the next slide here is just the City of Fargo has scheduled a couple public meetings. First one is the night of April 12th, and Thursday there's another one on April 13th. These meetings are open house format only. We do not intend to provide a formal presentation. Really, we want to provide the opportunity of our residents to come and ask questions of our staff on maybe their specific property, if they have questions on what river levels their home could potentially be affected, as well as what our plans are for our emergency flood fight this upcoming spring. And of course, if anybody has any questions, we direct them to our website, fargond.gov/flood2023, where there's a lot more additional information, as well as the interactive flood stage maps that they can view their properties at. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
All right, thanks, Nathan. So kind of on a similar slide to what Nathan had talked about on the Red River, first with the Fargo gauge in that 34.2 to 37.8 range for that 50% to 10% range flood, that really has a couple different impacts on the county's flood fight, predominantly south of town in that 76th Avenue, County Road 81 area, where there are still some areas that need protection from trap bag temporary levees, as well as some sandbags once we start getting in that 36 to 38, 39 foot range. And as we get above 38, that's where we need some additional sandbags. We have on the Red River and Wild Rice area, both north and south of town, over the last 20 years, we've acquired 191 homes. So that's a lot of those homes that were most at risk and that we used to have to send, 3 to 5 or 1,000 sandbags to. So we've definitely reduced the need for sandbags in that Red River corridor, both north and south of town. Our main focus for this flood, we're really looking at the Kindred, Harwood, and Mapleton areas. So first in Kindred, based on that 10% to 50% chance flood, the rural residents along the Cheyenne River down in the Kindred area should expect what they saw last year in significant overland flooding, as well as flood conditions in 2019. Those are the most recent floods that I think are going to mirror what they'll see down there this year. A lot of that will depend if that Cheyenne River gets to over 5,000 cubic feet per second for flows. If that does generally above that for flows, it does overtop State Highway 46 west of Kindred, which then has some overland flooding impacts up towards the Davenport area and for some other rural areas. So that'll be the telltale as to how bad the flooding is down in the Kindred area, is whether the Cheyenne overtops State 46. In the Harwood area, because of the confluence of the Maple River just south of Harwood, and then the confluence with the Cheyenne and the Rush River immediately west of Harwood, those two river systems, we expect significant floodwaters coming, especially on that Rush River, which has seen a lot of snowfall north of Castleton up through the Amenia, Arthur area. So we do expect some pretty significant flooding in Harwood. People should expect at least what they saw in 2019 for flood elevations in that mid 91, 91.5, to what they saw in 2011, which was a near record, and that was at about 91.8. You can see the big difference in the river systems, between on the red in Fargo, between the 50% chance and the 10% chance, there's 3 to 4 feet of difference in elevation and flood elevation. At Harwood, the 10% to the 50% chance is less than a foot, 0.6 feet. So it really just depends, is it spilling over that next road and overtopping and filling up that next field and surrounding those rural farmsteads and rural communities. So we'll be keeping an eye on that area as one of the main focuses, and that's where we expect to send a lot of our sandbags. And because of the challenge in, as we work with the National Weather Service on what that crest is going to be, is it going to crest at 91.5 or at roughly 91.8 or 92? That last half a foot makes a big difference for a number of people out there. So we do expect a number of sandbags going out and flood protection in the area. And then the Maple River, for most people in the rural areas north and south of Mapleton, expect 2019 flood type scenario. It could get worse. Fortunately, we do have 2 different operational dam systems on the Maple River, one down by Leonard and one up by Page, and between Page and Hope. So both of those dam systems that have been built over the last 20 years provide significant benefit to the Mapleton area. A note when it comes to our flood strategy, we're different than the cities in that the county's flood fight is for those rural residents that live outside of the city limits. So if you're living in Harwood, in Mapleton, in Fargo, West Fargo, talk and communicate with your city officials. If you're outside of the city limits, then we're your flood fighting support. We're here to provide guidance, technical expertise, and historical data. We're going to work with them to get flood mitigation for sandbags. But it's on the homeowner to make their own assessment for risk on whether or not they need to build sandbag levee around their house, or maybe they're not. They feel their risk is good, that they're not going to do any flood fighting efforts. That's an individual risk that, as the county, we're not going to tell them, but we are here to provide that support. We've got the expertise, we've got the aerial imagery from past floods, and a lot of good information to pass on to folks. So again, when we look at where we're preparing for 38 feet on the red, we're preparing for that 91.5 to 92 at Harwood. On the Cheyenne, 20.5 to 21.2 in Kindred. And on the Maple at Mapleton, 22.4 to 23.2. And I think the bottom bullet is really a key. We don't know, every flood is different when it comes to overland flooding. People up in the Garden area, people up in the Page area. Floodwaters, depending on how plugged culverts are, how different ditches operate, we can expect different overflowing overland flooding. So people should just be aware of that, especially not only with their house and protecting their property, but access in and out of their property. So they may leave for work for the day and come home and not have access to their property. We are starting up our sandbag operations tomorrow at 9:30, and with that goal that was discussed earlier, 200,000 sandbags. Our main focus is going to be, again, Tuesday through Friday, where we've got schedules ready to go for the weekend and into next week if possible. Right now, for volunteer information, go to our county website at casscountynd.gov. click on the flood link. There are a few different areas that we're still a little short on volunteers. Tomorrow in the afternoon, once the schools leave for the day, we do have some openings from that 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock timeframe. On both Wednesday and Thursday, we do have some additional rural schools that are coming in and supporting us in the later afternoon to evening. So we have a few openings late in the evening in that 7 o'clock, 6 to 6, 7, 8 o'clock timeframe. And then Friday, we still have some openings. So encourage volunteers, whether you're an individual or a group at work or an organization, to come out and volunteer for us. And again, our Cass County Flood website, you got all the information for both sandbags, volunteers, as well as flood risk map for those rural residents that are looking for specific information on their subdivision or rural farmstead. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dustin Scott with West Fargo.
Well, thank you, Jason. Let's see. Well, luckily in West Fargo here, we've had a diversion for 30 years. 1993 is actually the first event where our Cheyenne River Flood Protection Project was put to the test, and we have stood the time and lived through the historic events of 1997 and 2009. And so when we start preparing for the melt conditions and the flooding conditions in the spring, our efforts are certainly a little different than Fargo and Cass County. As you can see here on the map, we have what's called the Horace Diversion Channel and the West Fargo Diversion Channel. Really, on the south side of town, we have flows that are splitting at a structure in Horace, and so the river, really about half of it's going around in the diversion channel, and the other half is flowing full in the river channel through town up to I-94. And that's where we end up still spending a lot of time during the flood conditions, where we are concerned with the potential breakout of that river on the south side of town. So we do a lot of monitoring and making sure those conditions are well. The flow rate is monitored with Southeast Cass Water Resource District, and between them and the city, we hit trigger points where we know we got to shut gates, turn on the pumps. But again, our flood fight is very well. We're well prepared. We're not building temporary clay levees, but just because we're operating diversion doesn't mean that we're not out there trying to make sure everything's operating well. And a lot of our efforts and our day-to-days, again, is just very heavily focused on monitoring those conditions, making sure those things are functioning as they are intended. We always issue out reminders to our residents to help with that effort. Look in your backyards if you're seeing anything, if you're noticing that the water is starting to come out in a certain location, certainly get a hold of the city as soon as you can. But again, our efforts are pretty streamlined. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
So it could be a pretty good sized flood, one of the top 10, or it could be a flood that kind of comes and does not quite get to the height we'd like it not to get. We have to be prepared. It has always been the stance of our community that we will prepare for any flood and we will not lose a flood fight. So on this one, we will re-update you. If we find that we can go down in our sandbag count at some point, we would re-inform the public of that. I would ask you all as community partners, please look at your schedules. If you can fill in the late evenings, that would be fantastic. I know our fire department and some of our city staff are going to be out there filling in slots that have to be filled in. I know the county's also going to have some of their employees work as well. So we can hope and pray that we have just a nice soft spring, and it just was wonderful when we barely get any flooding. But bear in mind, we are going to have a flood fight. It just might not be as high as earlier as predicted, but we always have to be prepared. If we make too many sandbags, we can always put them in storage and keep them. When the diversion is done in 26, Nathan, pretty much, right? we should not have to do any of this work. So we're really excited when we listen to West Fargo, the great work that's been done with that diversion. And we too, as a city, will be prepared for this one. I think the county, the reason we moved the county sandbagging operation to the county is most of the need is in the county. It's easier then to transport out into the field to the people that need it. And we will also be transporting to our sites for storage as well. So thank you for all coming. I think that you're going to, Chad Peterson, make the final remarks. Thank you. And then we'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. So I've been here my whole life. You've just had a lot of numbers thrown at you. If you're new to the area, most of these numbers don't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. 90 feet of this and 200,000 of those and 13 feet of that. Know that we are good at fighting floods. Know that this local government is here to support you as you see fit. It's incredibly important that you know that you are not worried, that you are not concerned. Know that we are, as the mayor said, good at fighting floods. We've invested local dollars, local engineering time in spades. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have been invested since my young years, which were not that long ago, but some time ago. This used to be a big deal for us. Sandbags in every backyard up and down North Fargo, sandbags throughout the rural areas. It was impactful. Now it's still impactful, but less so. We still have to do our due diligence. We still have to plan and prepare. We still have to make our sandbags and volunteer our time. And for all of you that are going to volunteer, I am so grateful for you. I know you've got other things you can do. Your neighbors appreciate every moment of effort you'll be putting forth. Lastly, North Dakotans and Minnesotans, as I said in our prior press conference, are terrible at asking for help. If you're new to the area, you've learned that. Your neighbors don't ask you for help. They'd rather suffer through heart attacks, snow, or a bad evening, a bad day, than ask their neighbors for help. Now is not the time to be a stern, firm-hearted North Dakotan Minnesotan. If you need help, you need to ask. This is what we are here for. Local government, whether it's first responders, whether it's our friends in engineering, whether it's our friends in City Hall, or the county courthouses. We are here for this. This is what we do, and we're good at it. If you need help, please ask. We will get through this. And again, for all of you who will volunteer and all of you that have sacrificed your homes and land because of the diversion, we will never be able to thank you enough. God bless.
Any questions? Greg, do you have a mic for them, please?
So do we have any sandbags in storage now? And if so, how many?
Probably have minimal or none.
Currently, the city of Fargo has no filled sandbags on hand.
And that's the
We
same.
give them away.
That's the same for Cass County. We used the last of ours last spring in the flood fight in Kindred, and actually Fargo gave us some of theirs to complete those missions.
Anybody else? It was perfectly clear. I see the mayor of Horace here, and you're going to get some sandbags from us too, right, Corey?
Yeah, get a couple thousand would be good for getting started. I know, like in Horace, just like was mentioned, you know, most of us are protected by the current diversion, but we still have an area in the southwest part of our town that got involved in the 2009, 2011, and it sounds like this might be another one. So we just kind of want to be prepared for that as well to make sure that they can have access to sandbags and can help out as necessary.
Anybody else? Thank you for showing up today. We appreciate it and hope you're at the sandbag cast tonight, right? Thanks.